Hi, and welcome to the first podcast in the Ecosystems Dynamics module. This is Lesson 1, Introduction to Dynamics of Ecosystems. I'm going to start the module off with a quick short story on the following picture here, and this is a picture, of course, of Lake Winnipeg. Dawn breaks over Lake Winnipeg. The early morning sunlight sparkles in the calm water. The plaintive call of a loon can be heard over a chorus of bullfrogs and red-winged blackbirds. A moose and her calf wade quietly in the muddy shallows, breakfasting on water lilies and pondweed. Jewel-like dragonflies chase mosquitoes along the water's edge as a snapping turtle suns itself on a rock. An eagle circles lazily overhead. Minnows dart in and out of wild rice in the shallows, while a northern pike lurks in the deeper water hoping for a meal. Two canoeists survey the scene and quietly remark that it is going to be a beautiful summer day. So, first of all, just from having a look at the picture and listening to the story, of course, there's many different living things that we could identify. The moose, the loon, the bullfrogs, the blackbirds, but also non-living things too. Non-living things like the water, um, the weather, the sunlight. All of these things interact within an ecosystem, and that's really what we're going to be talking about in the first um, lesson here, as well as in the module throughout. So moving along, we come to sort of an overview of what this particular module is going to cover, and we can see that we're sort of looking, or we're starting at the dynamics of ecosystems right here, and we're going to look at four main components within this lesson. We're starting right now, lesson 1 and lesson 2, we'll be looking at energy flows, and within energy flows we talk about a concept like food chains, and we've all heard of the word food chain, probably know what a food chain is, but we might not have heard of trophic levels or food webs, and we'll be talking about those coming up. The second part of the module looks at this idea of biogeochemical cycles, and while that sounds like a really um, complex word, it's really just a word to describe the different cycles of nutrient cycles that we have in our ecosystems. So carbon and oxygen cycle, for example, the nitrogen cycle, and of course you would have studied at some point the water cycle, but that could be included in there, and that's not something we'll look at, but that's pretty straightforward. We then come to the idea of populations, and populations is sort of the third sort of group of things that we'll be looking at. In populations, we'll be looking at concepts like population growth, how a population grows over time. We'll look at this idea of age population distributions. And with age population distributions, we'll particularly look at people. Um, and then finally, within population growth, we'll look on things that limit populations. So things that will either help or hinder the population growth. We come to the last sort of section here, and we won't be talking too much on humans and ecosystems, but one of the main words that comes out of this sort of section and the lessons that follow is the idea of sustainability. And also in there, we have this other word that people throw out there, biodiversity. Um, So this is just an overview of the course. We're going to be just looking at today's lesson 1, just the introduction to it. And brings us to this first picture here. And the reason why I threw this picture in, this picture, by the way, is very famous. This is known as Earthrise. This was a picture taken by the first Apollo mission to the moon. And what the astronauts did upon landing on the moon is they looked at the Earth and they took a picture. And the reason why this is so important is because of this picture, um, we sort of have our understanding and the whole movement of the environment came about. So the Earthrise picture was taken. People began to understand or began to look at the Earth and see how small it was. Now, that's not something we notice while we're standing on it, but from space, the Earth is quite small. And so as a result of this picture, we got the science of ecology. And ecology is just a fancy word. Eco comes from a Greek word meaning home or house. And so ecology really is the scientific study of where you live or where we live. And in particular, ecology in this course would be the study of the interactions among organisms and their environment. So of course, the um, people that study ecology are known as ecologists. And for the time being, as you study this module, effectively you are an ecologist when you're studying. Okay, so we come to another word that we brought up before, and that's the word of ecosystem. So on the planet, there are many diverse plants and animals. Um, Ecologists study smaller areas called ecosystems, and this is an example of an ecosystem. This is an area in the Rocky Mountains, and there are two terms that we're going to learn that all ecosystems have, and different factors, I guess, that ecosystems have. The first is biotic factors. So biotic factors are really just living things. So in this picture, we can see that we have, for example, these flowers here. We have some conifers or trees there. And that's all living things or biotic factors in an ecosystem. Now, I'm sure if we were to zoom in on parts of the forest and parts of the land, we would see animals, but in the picture, we can't see them. We have another part of an ecosystem, or all ecosystems have two parts. They have the biotic or the living, and they also have the abiotic or the non-living. And these are just as important. And so non-living components would be maybe the water here, could be the weather up here, sunlight, wind. These are all examples of abiotic things. So all living things within an ecosystem have a place in which they live. And this word is known, or this is known as its habitat. So all living things have a habitat or a place that they live. So the polar bear, for example, lives in the north or in the tundra, maybe in Churchill. That would be its habitat. That's the place where it lives. There's another word that's important when we look at organisms, and that's the word of niche or niche. And an organism's niche is not only where it lives, but what it does when it's in its ecosystem. So again, looking at our polar bear here, polar bear lives in the tundra, lives in Churchill. It feeds on seals, it feeds on, probably scavenges for berries, and all of that combined is that species or is that organism's niche. So that's those two words there. Now, if we want to look at specific jobs that organisms do, we sort of get to the last part. So some organisms, their niche is to trap energy from the sunlight and produce their own food. And they're essentially known as producers. And there's two main types of producers in an ecosystem. We have our algae and we have plants. Now, if we look at some of the algae, this right here, this is a kelp forest. Um, British Columbia off the coast, you'd see a lot of that. That's all algae in there, and that would convert sunlight into a food source for that particular ecosystem. The different plants here would do the same for their ecosystems. So producers are one type. Animals are known as consumers. And that's because animals don't produce their own food. We need to get our food from the environment. And we can get it from a variety of different sources. We can get it from plants, we can get it from other animals, or we can get it from a combination. We'll learn about that in the next lesson on energy flows. Finally, we come to the last group, and this group is not really thought of too much, but it is just as important. Um, and those are the decomposers. An ecosystem relies on decomposers to break down uh, dead material or waste material and convert it back into something that's useful. And we'll see decomposers playing a huge role when we look at those biogeochemical cycles. So that's lesson 1, an introduction to the dynamics of ecosystems, and we'll be going into more detail on these things later. Right now, read through the quick stuff on the web, and you can begin working on the lesson 1 assignment.